Theft of a loaf of bread, the prosecutor said, voice sharp as glass. In the center of the courtroom, a man stood still, his coat frayed, his hands trembling, his eyes heavy with a hunger deeper than food. I just needed strength to live one more day, he whispered. A few chuckles slipped through the room like creaking floorboards. But the judge didn't laugh. He froze, his breath caught. And when he read the man's name aloud, Raymond Elias Carter, his eyes filled not with judgment, but with tears. Why, who was this man wrapped in silence and rags who could make a judge stand without a word? The courtroom was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the tense, hollow silence of a room that had long forgotten how to listen. Fluorescent lights buzzed above like insects trapped in glass. A heavy clock ticked from the back wall. Lawyers whispered over manila folders. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old paper. Then the sound thump, thump, clink as a pair of scuffed boots entered from the side. Shackled wrists, a bowed head, a coat too thin for the season. Raymond Carter, age 67, shuffled toward the defense table. Like a ghost, no one expected to haunt this place. The clerk didn't look up. Case 30-9817. State of Pennsylvania versus Carter Raymond Elias. The prosecutor, fresh-faced and bored, rose. Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended stealing a loaf of bread from Kensington Market. Given previous violations and lack of residence, we recommend continued detention. Just another petty thief, another invisible man cycling through a system designed to process, not to see. The judge barely lifted his eyes. Mr. Carter, how do you plead? Raymond's voice cracked the silence like glass underfoot. Guilty, Your Honor. I was hungry. A scoff echoed from the back row. Someone stifled a chuckle. Another yawned. Just a homeless man. Just a piece of debris drifting through the city's undercurrent. Nothing new. But the judge didn't smirk. He didn't scribble a note. Instead, his eyes snapped to the intake form. He paused. His breath hitched. Something in his chest turned cold. Raymond Elias Carter. He read the name again. Time stopped. Judge Nathaniel Brooks, decorated veteran hardliner on the bench, feared for his sentences, and known for his efficiency, suddenly stood. Not a word. Not a gesture. Just a man rising slowly from his chair, eyes fixed on the man in the defendant's seat, like he was seeing a ghost from a war he thought he'd buried long ago. Gas fluttered across the room like wind through dry leaves. Court is in recess for 15 minutes, Brooks said, voice tight and uneven. The defendant will remain. No explanation, just silence. The kind that vibrates with something deeper than confusion recognition. Raymond didn't move. His eyes stayed low. But in that moment, something shifted. Something ancient and buried began to surface. Not in him, but in the judge. What had he just seen? What did that name mean? And why had the most composed judge in Philadelphia suddenly gone pale? Sometimes justice begins not with a bang or a verdict, but with a name. Stick around. You're going to want to hear how this story ends. If stories like this move, you don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter, the ones you won't find in the headlines, but will never forget once you've heard them. Now, a quick question for you. Who do you think Raymond Carter is? A, repeat petty thief with nothing left. B, a forgotten war hero who once saved a life. Comment your answer below, A or B, and let us know what your heart tells you. Before Raymond Carter became the man in the courtroom, he was something else entirely sharp, steady, the kind of man who didn't flinch when chaos came crashing in. He once stood tall in desert fatigues beneath the blistering sun of Fallujah, eyes narrowed against sandstorms that could peel skin. His job wasn't glamorous. He didn't fly choppers or led battalions. He drove trucks, carried supplies, delivered fuel under firewater, under warning shots, medicine to places others abandoned. And he did it without complaint. 22 years in the United States Army, logistics and forward support, a machine made of muscle and instinct. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the lifeline of men too injured to move and too proud to cry out. He earned his Bronze Star not with a flourish, but with a scream muffled beneath fire his own as he dragged a burning vehicle away from his convoy. 17 lives spared because Raymond Carter chose to drive toward the explosion instead of away from it. But medals don't hold you at night. And after the war, it wasn't enemy fire that brought him to his knees. It was loss. Claire, his wife, the only voice that had ever softened his silence. A woman who read novels aloud even when no one was listening, who would pack handwritten notes in the few care packages he received while deployed small things folded like secrets. Come home whole. The porch light's still on. I miss your laugh. She was the one he came home to. And then she was the one he buried. The cancer had come fast. A cough, fatigue, a misdiagnosis. Then another. By the time the doctors took it seriously, there were tumors where her laughter used to live. Within 5 months, she was gone. The military taught Raymond to survive, but it never taught him how to grieve. Not like that. Not when the person you fought for disappears before your eyes and there's no battlefield to blame. He sold the house, gave the proceeds to the literacy foundation Claire had loved. He didn't want a home without her, didn't want things. He wanted to disappear like smoke after a shot fired into the wind, and so he did. He slipped into the cracks of the city quiet and methodical like he had been trained to do. He never panhandled, never shouted. He walked with purpose, eyes low, steps practiced, collected cans, slept under awnings, folded himself into places where he wouldn't be seen, because being seen meant being pitied, and pity was worse than pain. No one knew the man who passed by in the threadbare coat with the old army backpack. No one saw the soldier under the soot, the husband under the silence, the hero under the hunger. Every night before sleep swallowed him whole, he'd reach into the pocket closest to his chest. Inside was a photo, Claire smiling in the sun, and he'd whisper the same thing like a prayer sent into the dark, almost home, darling. Just one more day. And the world went on, unaware it was walking past greatness wrapped in rags. The door to Judge Nathaniel Brooks' chambers closed with a muted thud, muffling the buzz of the courtroom outside. He stood still for a moment, not out of habit, but because his body refused to move. Something was unraveling inside him, a slow tightening coil in his chest, triggered not by what the defendant had done, but by who he was, Raymond Elias Carter. That name had come down like a lightning strike. It echoed in his ears, sharp and strange, like a memory that had been waiting to be called. The judge crossed the room, his usually steady hands now trembling, as he reached for the bottom drawer of his desk. It creaked open, revealing a thin leather folder he hadn't touched in years. Not since the war. Not since he'd stopped letting himself remember. Inside was a photograph, its corners worn soft, the ink slightly faded with time. 12 men stood before a sun-scorched medical tent somewhere in Kandahar, dust on their boots, weight in their eyes. In the back row stood a broad-shouldered soldier, eyes calm but fierce, arms crossed as if daring the world to try him. That man was Raymond Carter. The same man now sitting in his courtroom in handcuffs, looking like the city had swallowed him whole. Nathaniel sat down slowly, the chair groaning under him as if sharing the weight. He stared at the photo, then at his own face, younger, more naive, sleeves rolled, a medic's bag slung over his shoulder. And just like that, the memories surged. It had been a convoy. Supplies, fuel, medical aid routine, until the blast turned the road into chaos. Fire bloomed like a beast from the dirt. Gunfire cracked like snapping bones. Soldiers scattered. And somewhere in the smoke, he'd gone down, metal ripping into his leg, pain erupting like thunder. His vision blurred. Everything smelled of gasoline and burning rubber. But then hands, not panicked, but deliberate. Strong arms gripping his vest. A voice low and steady cutting through the screams. "You're not done yet, kid. Keep breathing." Raymond had carried him. 2 miles, under fire, with shrapnel in his own leg. No medals were exchanged that day. No speeches. Just the sound of boots pounding dirt, gunfire behind them, and a man refusing to let another die. For years, Judge Brooks had wondered who that man was. They had never met again. In the churn of war, names were lost and files misplaced, but the debt remained quiet and undiminished. He turned to his laptop, logging into a secure military database he still had access to through his work with Veterans Affairs. He typed the name Raymond Elias Carter, and the screen lit up with service records that read like a eulogy disguised as data. Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart, 3 tours, logistics, field support, Kandahar 2004. And then, a photo. Raymond carrying an Afghan child through rubble ash in the air, eyes focused like a man who could not afford to fall apart. Judge Brooks closed his eyes. "My God," he whispered. "It's him." The man who saved his life had been forgotten by the very country he nearly died for. And now he was back, not in uniform, not in glory, but in chains. And something inside the judge broke open. Judge Nathaniel Brooks had once thought that nothing could surprise him anymore. He had seen too much on the battlefield and behind the bench. But that night in the dim quiet of his chambers, he realized there were still things that could shake him to his core. Not the act of war, but the silence after. The kind of silence that lets a hero vanish into the background of a city that never stops moving. Raymond Carter hadn't just been forgotten, he had been erased. The judge's fingers danced urgently across the keys of his laptop, accessing the Department of Veterans Affairs internal portal, his heart thudding like a distant drumbeat. He bypassed layers of login screens until the system finally gave way. He searched for benefit records, pension status, medical support. His eyes scanned line after line of bureaucratic language. Then came the code that hollowed his stomach. File inactive, address unverified, benefits suspended. The date stamped beside it was almost mocking, March 12, 2008. 15 years ago. One missed form, one undelivered envelope, one system that valued forms more than people. Raymond hadn't disappeared because he failed. He disappeared because the country stopped looking for him. The screen confirmed what Brooks feared: Carter's monthly pension, $360 owed without interruption, had been cut off when letters sent to his now-sold address bounced back. No phone call, no follow-up, just silence. He leaned back in his chair as the weight of it landed. 15 years of no income. No treatment for service-connected injuries. No housing support. 15 years spent scavenging food and sleeping near storm drains because a machine designed to protect him had turned cold. The number blinked at him from the screen: $245, $700 in unpaid benefits. Judge Brooks felt heat rising in his chest, not just guilt, but rage. Not the sharp, explosive kind, but a slow-boiling anger that made his hands shake and his throat tighten. This wasn't just about Raymond. It was about every soldier turned ghost, every folder gathering dust in a forgotten drawer. Without thinking, Brooks reached for the phone and called the one man he knew would understand. Colonel David Ellison answered on the second ring. "I found him," the judge said, voice barely above a whisper. "Raymond Carter. He's alive." Ellison didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was a low growl. "Where is he?" "In my courtroom." "Philadelphia. He was arrested for stealing bread." Another silence. "Then don't let him go." "I'm coming." The call ended, but Brooks didn't move. He sat in the pale glow of the screen, his pulse thudding in his ears. Outside, the city buzzed sirens, footsteps, distant horns, but inside that office a reckoning had begun. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a national wound, and this time it wouldn't be covered with paperwork. This time it would be answered with voices, with justice, with truth. The system had failed Raymond Carter, but one man had remembered, and that memory was about to ignite something no one could ignore. The doors to courtroom 3B creaked open like old wounds being pulled wide. This time it wasn't just attorneys and board clerks filing in, it was something heavier, something sacred. Rows filled with veterans in full uniform, civilians, holding small flags in folded hands, students with wide eyes and reporters already scribbling into notebooks. There was no buzz, no idle chatter, just a thick, solemn stillness, as if the room had realized what it had failed to see the day before. Raymond Carter stood at the defense table again, wearing the same weathered coat, his hands folded over the scarred wood, like a man expecting another blow. He didn't understand the change in atmosphere. He didn't trust it. Not yet. Then came the click of dress shoes on tiles, sharp, deliberate, and the room shifted. Colonel David Ellison stepped forward, posture, straight uniform, crisp beneath the fluorescent glow. He walked past the rows of silent observers and stopped in front of Raymond. For a moment, he didn't say a word. He just looked. "You haven't changed," Staff Sergeant Ellison said, voice rough but steady. "Still standing tall even when the world forgets you." Raymond blinked, unsure whether he was dreaming. Then from the gallery, a ripple of motion, 3 more veterans rose, followed by 5 more. Quiet salutes. A chain reaction of honor in a place not known for reverence. The room, once indifferent, now bent toward a man it had ignored. Judge Nathaniel Brooks entered, And this time the silence broke not with whispers, but with the shuffle of people standing to attention. Not by protocol, by respect. "Please be seated," he said, though his own voice faltered for the first time since taking the bench. The prosecutor, looking small beneath his polished tie, remained seated, glancing uneasily at his notes. Judge Brooks cleared his throat and turned to the room. "Before we proceed with charges, this court will hear testimony that may influence our understanding of the defendant." Colonel Ellison approached the witness stand. When sworn in, he did not read from a statement. He spoke like soldiers do, direct and unshakable. 17 lives, he said. That's how many Raymond Carter saved during the Kandahar ambush. He drove a burning fuel truck out of the kill zone to keep it from exploding, and then on foot he carried a wounded medic 2 miles to safety. His gaze shifted. That medic was this judge. Gasps rippled like wind through wheat. Brooks removed his glasses slowly. I didn't know his name. Just his hands pulling me from the fire. His voice telling me to keep breathing. That voice is why I'm here. The prosecutor stood, but his words were soft now. "While we respect the defendant's past, the theft still occurred." Ellison cut in, lifting a folder. "It wasn't theft, it was survival, and he should never have been in that position. His benefits were cut off due to clerical error. Over $240,000 owed. No notice, no justice." Judge Brooks turned to Raymond. "Would you approach the bench?" Raymond moved slowly like a man waking from a long sleep. The judge's voice was barely above a whisper. "You saved me once. Let me return the favor." With a single nod from the prosecutor, the charges were dropped. And for the first time in years, the courtroom didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place where something holy had been remembered. By the time the sun dipped behind the steeples of Center City, Raymond Carter's name had already crossed coasts. It started with a whisper, an early blog post, shaky cell phone footage uploaded by a law clerk. A simple caption, "The homeless man who saved the judge." Within hours, that whisper grew into a roar. Across phones, laptops, and headlines, a grainy image flickered again and again. Raymond hunched in his threadbare coat, shackled but unbroken. Beside it, an older photograph, sepia-toned, sun-bleached soldier with dirt on his face, and a child in his arms, eyes locked on a horizon thick with smoke. Same man, different lifetimes. The story spread like wildfire, not because of sensationalism, but because something about it cut through the noise. It wasn't politics, it wasn't scandal. It was truth raw and undressed, a nation that had forgotten one of its own, and a courtroom that just in time remembered. News anchors stumbled through their coverage, stunned by how wrong the narrative had been. Bread thief transformed overnight into decorated hero neglected by the system. Morning talk shows framed his story between war footage and VA reports. At airports, in diners and truck stops, people talked about Raymond Carter, not as a symbol, but as a question. How many more in less than 24 hours? A campaign called Bring Raymond Home launched online. The goal was modest, $10,000 for housing and care. It passed that within 90 minutes. By morning, it sat at $227,000 and climbing. Donations came from every corner of the country: veterans, teachers, single parents, teenagers, retirees, strangers who'd never worn a uniform but recognized courage when they saw it. And the messages left with those donations, those were louder than money. "This is for my dad who died before anyone believed his PTSD was real. Because no one should be forgotten after serving. Thank you, Sergeant Carter. You carried more than a medic, you carried us all." The Department of Veterans Affairs responded quickly, too quickly. A press release promised immediate investigation into suspended benefits, dating back 15 years. Internal audits were announced. Offices that had long gathered dust lit up with calls, emails, and long overdue reckonings. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, Raymond remained silent. Not because he was indifferent, but because he was stunned. All his life he had trained for things that hurt, that tested, that stripped a man down to what was essential. But no one trains you for kindness when it finally comes. He was offered interviews, endorsement deals, a book advance. He refused most of them. Instead, he sat in the sunlight outside the courthouse, wearing a fresh pair of boots and a coat that actually fit. Judge Brooks sat beside him that afternoon, both men sipping lukewarm coffee, sharing silence like soldiers do. When a young reporter finally asked, "What would you like to say to the American people?" Raymond looked at the lens, then past it, and said, "Only this: I didn't ask to be remembered. I just hoped I wouldn't be erased. And for one beautiful moment, the world didn't scroll away. It stopped. It saw him. And this time it stayed. Raymond Carter never asked for a podium. He wasn't a man built for stages or spotlights. He spoke with his hands, with his silences, with the way he scanned a room like he still expected incoming fire. And yet there he stood under the flickering lights of a middle school gymnasium, facing rows of eighth graders, with sneakers dangling from bleachers and phones half hidden beneath hoodies. He cleared his throat. The mic crackled. No speech, no fanfare. Just a story. He spoke of heat, of sand so hot it blistered through boots, of the sting of diesel fuel in his nose and the metallic taste of adrenaline, of voices on radios screaming for help, and of the moment you realize that if you stop moving, someone dies. He spoke of men who didn't make it, and the ache of carrying more than bodies back to base, of coming home and finding yourself a stranger to everything except your own nightmares. But he also spoke of laughter, of letters from Claire that smelled like lavender, of watching a medic barely out of his teens try to bandage a dog bite in the middle of a firefight, of the music you hum to stay sane, and how even now he could still hear her voice in his head, soft, stubborn, telling him to keep going. The kids were quiet. Over time, the requests came more frequently: schools, churches, veterans groups, recovery centers. Raymond never turned them down, not because he wanted to be heard, but because he didn't want anyone else to feel invisible. His voice, weathered but steady, became a bridge between generations, between scars, between silence and survival. What began as a few appearances soon grew into something more. With the help of Judge Brooks and Colonel Ellison, Raymond launched Second Tour, a nonprofit aimed at helping homeless veterans over 50 find purpose, not just shelter. It was more than a program, it was a lifeline. Second Tour paired veterans with trade apprenticeships, offered mental health support, and reconnected lost service records to the benefits they deserved. But more than that, it gave them community, a place where a uniform wasn't a relic but a reminder of worth. Raymond didn't sit behind a desk. He showed up to the job fairs, visited men in halfway houses, cooked chili at weekend fundraisers. He shook every hand, remembered every name. When someone asked why he didn't slow down, he smiled. Because someone slowed down long enough to see me. Letters began arriving in droves, from strangers, from families of soldiers, from grown children who remembered Raymond visiting their schools. Your story made me check on my brother. My dad cried for the first time in 20 years after hearing you speak. I thought I was too broken to be useful. Then I heard your voice. Raymond kept every letter in a shoebox under his bed. On nights when sleep evaded him, he'd read them one by one like prayers folded into paper. He hadn't set out to become a voice for the forgotten. He just refused to let the forgotten stay silent. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the air hums soft against your skin and the world seems to walk a little slower, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. In the center of Washington Square Park, surrounded by a modest gathering of veterans, school children, and city officials, a new bronze bench had just been unveiled. Its surface gleamed beneath the early sun, brushed clean and already warmed by light. But it wasn't the shape of the bench that drew people closer. It was the words carved along its edge: for those who carried us without asking why, in honor of Staff Sergeant Raymond E. Carter. The inscription curved gently across the metal like a whisper etched in steel. Raymond stood beside it, one hand resting lightly on the backrest, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He was dressed in a simple dark suit with a small flag pin on his lapel. His tie was crooked, his shoes slightly scuffed, but his eyes were clear, and when he smiled, it reached deep into the folds of his face. To the side, Judge Nathaniel Brooks watched with quiet reverence, hands clasped in front of him. Colonel Ellison stood beside him, his uniform buttoned tight, eyes glinting behind age-worn lines. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One by one, people approached the bench. Some left flowers. Others ran their fingers over the engraved letters as if trying to feel the truth they told. A few simply sat down, closed their eyes, and let the weight of the moment settle into their bones. Then a boy no older than 10 stepped forward, his voice as fragile as morning frost. "Were you the man who saved the judge?" Raymond looked down at the child and knelt beside him. The wind caught the tails of his coat, fluttering like a flag unfurling in slow motion. "I just didn't leave him behind," he said. "That was all. But it was everything. From that day on, the bench became a place of memory. And not just for Raymond. People left notes tucked into its corners, worn photos of loved ones lost to war or swallowed by silence. One man came every week and read a poem aloud. A woman once brought her son and told him, "This is where America remembered itself." Raymond spent his afternoons there when the weather allowed, his hands folded over a paperback or a cup of coffee. Sometimes he talked to visitors. Other times he simply listened, because he understood better than most that sometimes the greatest gift is to be present. He died quietly 3 years later in the small apartment near Veterans Village that he had finally called home. On his nightstand were three things: a picture of Claire, a folded flag, and a shoebox of letters. At the memorial, Judge Brooks spoke last. His voice cracked once, then steadied. Raymond didn't seek recognition. He sought dignity. He didn't demand justice. He inspired it. A pause, then louder. He carried us, and now we carry him. And across the crowd, like a rising tide, people stood. Not out of habit, out of gratitude, out of love, out of memory. No one left behind. Not anymore. Final reflection. The story of Raymond Carter. Raymond Carter's story is not just about a homeless veteran or a courtroom surprise. It's about the quiet endurance of a man who refused to surrender his humanity, even when the world stopped seeing him. He served his country with courage, carried others through fire, and lived through the kind of pain that doesn't leave scars you can see. After losing the woman he loved and falling through the cracks of a system that forgot his name, he chose survival over bitterness, silence over spectacle. He walked invisible among us until the day a judge remembered. That moment of recognition turned a forgotten man into a national voice. Not because he demanded it, but because the truth is louder than applause. From a courtroom whisper to a nationwide movement, Raymond reminded us of something essential. Justice delayed can still be justice delivered. He proved that one life, no matter how hidden, can still carry the weight of many. The lesson: see people. Slow down. Listen. Whether it's the veteran at the bus stop or the elderly man at the grocery store, don't assume. Kindness doesn't need a stage. Sometimes it's as small as remembering someone's name. Now, a quick question for you. If you saw someone like Raymond today, what would you do? A, walk past and assume their story. B, slow down and look again. Comment your answer below, A or B, and let us know what you choose. What are your thoughts on Raymond's journey? Do you think we as a society are doing enough for our veterans and those left behind? Share your ideas in the comments so others can reflect too. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Let's keep remembering the forgotten, one story at a time. Final conclusion: the echo of one life. In the end, Raymond Carter's story isn't just about one man's redemption. It's about all of us. It's a mirror held up not to shame, but to awaken. It forces us to ask, how many heroes have we walked past today? How many lives have we overlooked because they no longer wore medals on their chests or uniforms on their backs? How many people are carrying invisible burdens while the world scrolls on? This was never about a loaf of bread. It was about the cost of forgetting. Raymond's journey teaches us that dignity doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from how we treat others and how we rise from the depths without bitterness. He lived through war, through grief, through years of cold concrete and silence. And yet, when finally seen, truly seen, he chose not to lash out, but to lift others up. That kind of strength isn't taught in training manuals. It's built in the quiet resilience of the human soul. He didn't scream for justice. He embodied it. He didn't beg for help. He offered it. He didn't ask to be remembered. He made himself unforgettable. His life reminds us that compassion doesn't need applause, that the smallest recognition, a name remembered, a hand extended, a story heard, can ripple into revolutions. In today's fast, noisy world, it's easy to overlook the people who move in silence. But perhaps the most impactful people are the ones who don't clamor for attention. They just carry others forward, step by quiet step. And perhaps the most powerful justice isn't the one delivered in courtrooms, but the one felt in the hearts of people who finally understand that no one should ever be left behind. So what do we do now? We look closer. We ask questions. We lead with empathy. We stop seeing people as problems to be solved and start honoring them as lives worth listening to. Raymond Carter's bench may stand still in a park, but his story is moving through conversations, through classrooms, through hearts. It challenges us to be better not someday, but now. Let this be more than a moment. Let it be a movement, because somewhere out there, another Raymond Carter's waiting, waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard, waiting for someone to care enough to stop and ask, what's your story? Let's make sure we're the ones who ask. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your heart even just a little, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful human stories to light. Real stories. Stories that matter. We don't just tell stories to be heard. We tell them to be remembered. And with your help, we will keep remembering. One voice, one life, one truth at a time.